Laura and Mark Holden's perfect life shattered the night Olivia's jealousy pushed Laura down the stairs, leaving their family in ruins and their darkest secrets exposed. What followed would not only test their marriage but unravel a dangerous web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. In the quiet suburban town of Brookhaven, life for Laura and Mark Holden appeared picture-perfect. They were the kind of couple everyone envied, well-dressed, well-spoken, and seemingly in love. Mark was a successful corporate lawyer, and Laura, his devoted wife, was a stay-at-home mom who had dedicated her life to raising their young son, Jason. Their house was a beautiful two-story home, complete with a manicured lawn and a white picket fence, symbolizing everything that people imagined when they thought of an ideal family. But behind the neatly drawn curtains, something was not right. Laura had noticed the changes in Mark long before the cracks in their relationship began to show. At first, it was small things. He was always tired, distracted, and didn't seem to be as interested in family life as he once had been. Mark would come home late from work, sometimes even after their son had gone to bed, and there was always an excuse. Big case at the firm, or had to meet with clients. Laura believed him at first. She trusted her husband, and after all, his work had always been demanding. But as the weeks passed, she began to feel a shift. Her intuition told her that something was off. One afternoon, Laura was folding laundry in the living room when she noticed Mark's phone lying on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with an incoming message, a name she didn't recognize, followed by a heart emoji. Her stomach twisted. She had never been the type to snoop, but something about that moment made her pick up the phone. The message was from a woman named Olivia. Her name didn't mean much at the time, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she opened the message thread, the text became increasingly flirtatious. There were multiple exchanges, messages about how much Olivia missed Mark, how she couldn't wait to see him again, and even references to secret meetings. The reality hit Laura like a punch to the gut. Her husband, the man she had built a life with, had been seeing someone else. As she stared at the screen, her hands shook. The room felt like it was closing in on her. She thought about confronting him right then, but instead, she put the phone back on the counter, pretending she hadn't seen anything. She knew she needed time to process it, to think about the best way to handle this situation. In the days that followed, the tension in the house grew. Mark seemed oblivious to Laura's inner turmoil, and though she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for their young son, the cracks in her heart grew deeper with each passing day. She began to feel invisible, as if her entire existence had been reduced to playing the role of the wife and mother. Mark was no longer the man she had married, the man who had promised to cherish her, to be faithful. He had become a stranger, someone who had slipped into an affair with no regard for the family he had built. Laura couldn't understand how he could do this to her. She was 7 months pregnant with their second child, and the weight of carrying both a child and the pain of betrayal felt unbearable. But despite the hurt, she decided not to confront Mark yet. She wanted to gather more information, to be sure of what she was dealing with. But with each passing day, the question lingered in her mind. How far was Mark willing to let this affair go? And what would he do when the truth finally came out? The suspense gnawed at her, but she couldn't let it consume her, not yet. Instead, Laura waited, watched, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. She knew that her life, their life, would never be the same again. The perfect facade of their marriage had crumbled, and the secrets Mark had been hiding would soon be exposed. The days that followed Laura's discovery were a blur of confusion and heartbreak. She didn't know what to do with the crushing weight of the secret she now carried. Mark was acting as though everything was normal, coming home late, talking about work, making small talk about Jason's school activities. But to Laura, it was all a facade. She knew the truth now, and it felt like a shadow hanging over everything. Her emotions ranged from anger to betrayal to a deep, aching sadness. How could the man she had trusted above all others be the one to break her heart like this? Laura thought about confronting him right away, but something stopped her. She needed to be sure, to know the full extent of what was going on. She couldn't just go on a hunch or a single text message. She had to understand how deep the affair really was, and how far Mark had gone. Every time she saw him, a knot tightened in her stomach, but she kept her composure, hoping that something would change, that somehow he would confess without her having to say a word. Her chance to confront him came one evening when Mark returned home earlier than usual. Laura was sitting in the living room nursing a cup of tea, trying to unwind after another long day. Jason was already in bed, and the house was quiet, too quiet. Mark walked in, removing his jacket and hanging it on the coat rack. His eyes briefly met hers, but there was no warmth in his gaze. He didn't smile, didn't ask how her day had been, and certainly didn't acknowledge the silent distance that had grown between them. It felt like she was looking at a stranger. "How was your day?" Laura asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mark shrugged. "Same as usual. Nothing special." Laura's heart pounded in her chest as she gathered her courage. This was it. She could no longer live in this state of uncertainty. She had to confront him. Taking a deep breath, she stood up and walked toward him. "I found out about Olivia," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words hit like a hammer. Mark froze. The blood drained from his face as his eyes widened in shock. He didn't say anything immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. Laura could feel the tension building in the room, thick and suffocating. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to keep her emotions in check. "You don't have to say anything," she continued, her voice trembling now. "I know. I saw the messages." Mark's eyes darted to the floor, unable to meet her gaze. He didn't need to say anything more. His guilty posture, the way he avoided her stare, told her everything. He wasn't sorry. Not really. He wasn't ashamed either. It was as though he had already accepted that this was his new reality. Laura's mind raced as the anger and betrayal surged within her, threatening to consume her. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to make him feel the pain she felt. But instead she stood there, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. For a long moment, neither of them moved, as if frozen in time. Laura had expected Mark to apologize, to at least offer an explanation, but he didn't. He didn't even try to justify his actions. His indifference cut deeper than any confession ever could. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice low and defensive. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan this, Laura. It just happened." "Just happened," Laura repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You don't just fall into an affair, Mark. You choose it, every day." He didn't reply to that. Instead, he walked past her, heading toward the kitchen, clearly trying to escape the uncomfortable confrontation. Laura stood there for a moment, the room spinning around her. She was exhausted, not just physically from the pregnancy, but emotionally from the weight of the betrayal. She had thought she knew Mark. She had thought he was the man she could trust with everything, her partner in all things. But now she was left standing in the wreckage of their marriage, unsure of who he really was anymore. That night, after Mark had retreated to the bedroom, Laura lay awake in their bed, staring at the ceiling. The house that had once felt like a safe haven now felt like a prison. Every corner seemed to whisper the lies Mark had been telling her for months. She tried to convince herself that things could change, that maybe this was a wake-up call for him. But deep down she knew the truth. Mark wasn't the man she had married anymore. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Sleep never came that night. As the darkness stretched on, Laura wrestled with her emotions. The anger was overwhelming, but so was the deep, gnawing sense of loss. What did she do now? How could she possibly move forward with a man who had chosen another woman over her, over their family? She didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain. Everything had changed, and she couldn't go back to the way things were. As the days stretched on, the distance between Laura and Mark only seemed to grow. Mark's behavior shifted from guilt-ridden to defensive, and then to outright neglect. He began staying late at the office more often, sometimes not coming home, until after midnight. Laura had no way of knowing where he was or what he was doing. The silence between them became unbearable, and the conversations they once had so easily were now just awkward exchanges. Mark's once warm embrace was now a distant memory, replaced by cold, indifferent gestures. In those rare moments when they were in the same room, Laura could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. Every glance, every touch, felt laced with betrayal. She no longer knew the man sitting across from her, and she hated how his indifference made her feel invisible. Meanwhile, Olivia's presence loomed like a shadow in their home. Laura knew that Mark had been seeing her for months, but it seemed like she was everywhere now. Laura found herself obsessively looking for signs of Olivia's influence. Little things like the way Mark would absent-mindedly smile at his phone when he received a message, or how he would defend her at the slightest mention of her name. Olivia was a constant topic of conversation in the house, whether it was Mark defending his relationship with her or making excuses for why he hadn't ended things. The more Laura learned about Olivia, the more she realized that this wasn't just a fleeting affair. Olivia was no naive mistress. She was strategic and manipulative, and she had set her sights on Mark from the beginning. Laura had heard rumors around the office, whispers from mutual acquaintances, about Olivia's ambition. It was no secret that Olivia had a reputation for using her charm to get ahead in life, and Laura couldn't help but feel that she was no different in this situation. Mark was just another prize to be claimed, another notch in her belt. Laura's suspicion grew stronger as she began to notice the small ways Olivia had woven herself into their lives. It wasn't just the late-night texts and phone calls. Olivia was already taking steps to isolate Mark from Laura. She had subtly made her way into their social circle, showing up at events Laura had once considered exclusive to their family and friends. Every time Olivia entered a room, there was this feeling of subtle ownership, as if she was claiming a place that didn't belong to her. Laura felt like an outsider in her own home, and it became clear to her that Olivia was not just interested in Mark. She was interested in everything Laura had built with him. Despite all of this, Mark continued to act as though nothing was wrong. He kept justifying his behavior, making excuses for Olivia's actions and dismissing Laura's concerns as though they were insignificant. "You're just overreacting," he would say when Laura finally confronted him about the blatant messages she had found, or when she mentioned the way Olivia was becoming too involved in their lives. But Laura wasn't overreacting. She knew what she had seen. She had watched the slow unraveling of her marriage, and Mark's refusal to acknowledge it only made things worse. There were nights when Laura would lie awake in bed, the quiet hum of Mark's breathing next to her, the only sound in the dark. But it wasn't just the affair that kept her up. It was the feeling of betrayal, of knowing that the person she had trusted most had turned his back on her and their family. Mark wasn't the man she thought he was, and every time she tried to reach out to him, he pulled further away. Laura had spent years building this life, this family. She had sacrificed so much to make sure everything ran smoothly, to make their home a place of warmth and love. And now it seemed as though it was all crumbling before her eyes. She wasn't sure what to do, but she couldn't continue living in this emotional prison. The weight of the affair, the lies, and the manipulation was suffocating. She had to find a way out, whether that meant confronting Mark again or finally accepting that their marriage was beyond repair. But one thing was certain. Laura couldn't let Olivia continue to control her life. She had to take back her power. It was no longer just about her marriage. It was about reclaiming her own identity, her self-worth, and her future. The fight for her family was far from over. And though the road ahead seemed uncertain, she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let Olivia or Mark dictate her fate. The next steps would be the hardest of her life, but she was determined to take them, no matter the cost. The tension in the house had reached a breaking point. Every day felt like a battle between the invisible forces pulling Laura and Mark in opposite directions. Mark had grown increasingly distant, not just emotionally but physically as well. Laura could feel it in the way he avoided her gaze, in the way his touch no longer held any warmth. She was carrying their child, a son they had planned for, and yet Mark seemed to care more about his affair than the life they had created together. The thought of losing everything, her marriage, her family, her future, was a constant weight pressing down on her chest. But even with all the emotional chaos swirling around her, it wasn't until one particular evening that everything came to a head. Mark had promised he would be home early, but as usual he was running late. Laura, already on edge, was trying to make dinner when she heard the front door creak open. She had hoped it would be Mark, but instead it was Olivia. Laura froze for a moment, a sick feeling creeping into her stomach. Olivia had shown up uninvited before, but this time felt different. There was an air of expectation, of something calculated, in Olivia's presence. Laura's heart raced as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. She hadn't spoken to Olivia directly in weeks, but she knew deep down that this was no coincidence. Olivia wasn't just a mistress, she was making herself a permanent fixture in their lives. "Is Mark home?" Olivia asked, her voice far too sweet for the situation. "No, he's running late," Laura replied coolly, forcing herself to smile. Olivia seemed to take this as an invitation to make herself comfortable. Without waiting for permission, she walked into the living room, sitting down on the couch as if she belonged there. Laura stood still, unsure of what to do. The anger and humiliation of it all swirled inside her, but she couldn't show it. Not yet. She had been pushed too far, but she couldn't afford to lose control in front of Olivia. There was a strange tension in the air, as if Olivia was waiting for something, some reaction, some acknowledgement that she had won. And in a way she had. Laura realized that Olivia didn't just want Mark. She wanted to take everything from her: her family, her place in Mark's life, her home. And somehow she was succeeding. As the minutes ticked by, Olivia's smile never wavered. She casually mentioned how difficult it had been to juggle her job at the law firm and her personal life with Mark, her tone dripping with a sickly sweet mixture of flirtation and entitlement. Laura's blood boiled at her words, at how casually Olivia spoke of Mark as though he was her possession. But Laura stayed silent, gripping the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. The more Olivia spoke, the more Laura realized just how deep the betrayal ran. Finally, after what felt like hours, Mark came through the door. His eyes quickly flicked between the two women, and for the first time in a long time, there was a flicker of guilt in his gaze. But it was fleeting, replaced, almost immediately, by the indifference that had become all too familiar. Olivia greeted him with a bright, knowing smile, and Mark responded with a forced, almost robotic smile of his own. It was clear that nothing was going to change. Mark wasn't going to end things with Olivia, and Olivia wasn't going to back down. Laura could feel the walls closing in around her. She could feel her world shattering piece by piece. In that moment, she realized that if she didn't take action now, she might lose everything she had fought for. She couldn't keep pretending that everything would somehow go back to normal. The pain of watching her marriage crumble, of seeing Mark slowly slip away from her, was unbearable. Laura took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew she had to do. She couldn't let Olivia and Mark continue to tear her apart. But what could she do? She was pregnant, vulnerable, and trapped in a marriage that had been broken beyond repair. There was no going back, no fixing things. She had to take control of her own life, even if it meant making the hardest decisions she had ever faced. The situation was dire, and there was no easy way out. But Laura knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let Olivia win. She had to fight for herself and her future, even if it meant facing the possibility of losing the man she had once loved. The next few days would determine everything, and she wasn't sure what the outcome would be. But she was ready to face whatever came next. The night Laura fell down the stairs, it felt as though the world had tilted, leaving everything in chaos. She had been in the kitchen, her mind heavy with all the things she couldn't shake. Mark's betrayal, Olivia's presence, and the overwhelming pain of feeling so utterly powerless. The moment was inevitable. Laura's emotions, the years of silent suffering, and the constant ache of betrayal had built up to this terrifying peak. Mark had gone out again, this time for a business meeting, a story he'd told her more times than she could count. She had tried to fight it, tried to push the thoughts aside, but the truth was undeniable. He wasn't coming back. Not in the way she needed him to. He was already lost to her. Olivia had won. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She was carrying their child, and yet Mark's priority wasn't her or their family. It was Olivia. His every word and every glance toward her told Laura everything she needed to know. She was no longer his wife in any real sense. She was just someone to be ignored, to be discarded. And Olivia was more than willing to take her place. That night, as Laura stood by the kitchen counter, she felt as if she were drowning in grief. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being the one who held everything together. But now she couldn't breathe. The weight of the situation felt too heavy to carry alone. She tried to focus, trying to do something normal, something mundane like making dinner, but all she could do was stare at the door, waiting for Mark's return, as if he would somehow make everything okay again. It wasn't Mark who entered the house first, though. Olivia came in instead, standing at the threshold, her presence an intrusion that made the air in the room thicken. Laura didn't know what to say. She couldn't let Olivia have this power over her anymore, but as the two women locked eyes, there was no denying that Olivia was triumphant. Her cool demeanor, her confident stride, it was all too much for Laura to handle in that moment. It felt like a slap in the face, as if she were being forced to witness the life she had lost. Conversation quickly escalated. Olivia had no intention of leaving the house quietly. Laura, unable to hold back her emotions any longer, confronted her. The words spilled out, full of pain and raw anger. Olivia smirked, unapologetic, almost as if she enjoyed watching Laura crumble before her. The more Olivia taunted her, the more Laura's sense of control slipped away. Her hands began to shake. She was too tired, too hurt, and too broken to pretend anymore. In a moment of pure, uncontainable rage, Laura pushed past Olivia, trying to retreat to the upstairs, away from the suffocating situation. Olivia, though, wasn't about to let her escape so easily. Without warning, she shoved Laura back. The force of the push sent Laura tumbling backward. She tried to catch herself, but her body couldn't react fast enough. The stairs, those same stairs she had climbed so many times before, now became the scene of her fall. Everything happened so quickly. Laura heard the sickening crack of her body hitting the steps. Her breath knocked out of her as the world spun around her. When she came to, the pain was unbearable. Her head throbbed, and she felt a sharp sting in her side. Her limbs felt heavy, and unresponsive. She wanted to scream, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. Blood trickled from a gash in her forehead, and her stomach, a reminder of her unborn child, seemed to ache in a way she couldn't explain. It felt like everything inside her had broken apart, not just physically, but emotionally. Her body was telling her one thing, but her heart was telling her another. She had been pushed too far, and she was no longer in control. By the time Mark arrived home, the damage had been done. He found Laura lying at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes barely open, her body still and crumpled. His face paled as he rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he touched her shoulder. He was frantic, calling her name, but it was too late for apologies. His eyes flicked toward Olivia, who was standing at the top of the stairs, watching with a look of cold detachment. Mark's reaction was one of shock, but also something else. Guilt. Maybe, but more than that, it was an overwhelming sense of disbelief. The realization that things had escalated this far was evident in his eyes. Olivia, however, showed no sign of remorse. She stood there as if it were nothing more than a trivial moment, something insignificant in her grand scheme of winning Mark's affection. Laura, however, saw it all. She saw the way Mark's eyes avoided her, how he hadn't even thought to call an ambulance right away. She saw, too, how Olivia was already positioning herself to take the place she had wanted for so long. By the time Laura was rushed to the hospital, it was clear that her fall had caused serious damage. But the emotional wounds were even deeper. Her child had not survived, and though she was physically alive, she knew that she would never be the same. Mark's guilt and concern were only superficial. He had lost Laura long before that night, and Olivia, despite all her efforts, was still a mere catalyst to the tragic ending Laura had seen coming all along. In the weeks that followed, the truth began to unravel. Mark's affair with Olivia was exposed for what it was, and Olivia, despite her calculated manipulation, was left with nothing. Laura, though devastated by the loss of her child and her marriage, found herself in the painful process of rebuilding her life. She was determined to reclaim her strength, to not let the events of that night define her. The betrayal had been too much to bear, but it had also marked the beginning of her journey toward independence, toward healing. As for Mark and Olivia, their actions would eventually catch up to them, and the consequences of their choices would follow them long after the dust had settled. But for Laura, the real fight had just begun. She wasn't broken, not entirely, not yet.